We're really excited to have everyone with us here tonight, mostly because we know that most of you guys have been tracking with us as we've started Drive and supporting us and stuff like that, and so we really appreciate your support, and also because a whole bunch of you guys as well have joined us from the beginning and really not just joined us, you've actually pioneered Drive, and so we get to celebrate all together. And tonight isn't just a celebration of Drive, it's a celebration of church, and I'll explain that in a second. We've started this series at the beginning of the year called BiG. So you guys just saw the video of it. And the reason why we started this at the beginning of the year was because with the start of a new year, there's a lot of excitement and anticipation, like intrigue about what this year could hold for me. You know, people hope that maybe something big would happen to them this year, or they would be part of something big. And so we just called the series BiG, and we've talked about a whole bunch of different things up until now. At the start, we talked about big life, and Oscar was talking about how when you have a relationship with Jesus, he actually promises you a big life where you don't just feel like you're just existing, but there's meaning to what you're doing and you're living for a reason. And then we also talked about big things that God, because of him and how he's made us and how he's limitless, we have the potential to do big things in our lives. And today, we're actually talking about Big Church, which falls really good on our big birthday celebration of Drive and of church. And I know when I say that today's a celebration of church, I know that what some people would think, and that is because, you know, church isn't the most appealing thing on the face of the planet. Sometimes, you know, people would think, why is there a reason to celebrate church? People have different ideas about church, and it's not always exciting or appealing. I had a friend back in the day, he used to say to me, man, church isn't really for me. Like, I'm glad you go to church and, you know, it's helping you out and it's changed your life and stuff like that, but it's not really for me. And it wasn't just because he decided that out of the blue. There was a reason why he actually came to that conclusion, and the reason was because I think he thought that anything that church people or Christians would have to say wasn't really going to be anything that he'd be interested in, or anything that God would have to say wasn't really going to be anything that's relevant to him. And like I said, it didn't just come out of the blue. It was because we actually went to school together, and we went to this religious school. Actually, I got a mate of mine who's from my school tonight as well, so he'll know what I'm talking about. I don't even remember, we used to have these church things at school, and I don't even remember what the guy up the front was saying from one of them. I can't even recall what one message was, because it seemed like when they spoke, they almost spoke in a different language, like we just didn't get it. And it was really funny, right, because this mate of mine that I was talking to you guys about, we used to call him Germ, because he was like a parasite. He used to annoy everyone, even the teachers the most, right? So it was funny because we used to just sit there and we used to kind of look at everyone in that whole mass in the church thing, and we used to look at the kids and they would be bored out of their brain. And we'd think, all right, fair enough, the kids are bored, they have to be there. But even all the teachers and the adults and stuff, they all looked bored out of their brain too. And I'm just thinking, well, how come, you know, why do they make themselves come to this whole church thing? And I remember, like, because we used to sit together, and I remember teachers walking past him and the look that they would give him, because he kind of felt like church was for good people and all the kids that, you know, got awards and stuff like that, because teachers would walk past and, you know, they would look at my mate Germ and just give him this real disgusted sort of look up and down, like, you know, hope God forgives you, you little brat sort of thing. And so he really felt like church wasn't really for him. It wasn't going to be relevant to him. And, you know, it wasn't for bad people or people like him or people that might have messed up and stuff like that. And I know that maybe some of you guys have come across people that have thought that way, that have maybe thought, you know, church isn't really for me, or maybe they haven't said it out loud, but they just think it internally. Or maybe you've actually thought that for yourself, like you've actually thought, church isn't really for me. And you know what, I actually thought that myself, until I came to find out what church really was. But the thing is, I think the reason why people actually think that, it's not out of the blue. I think the reason why people actually think that was just like my mate Germ. Sometimes when people rock up to church, people talk on a different level, sort of using words that aren't familiar with the everyday person, that when someone comes in out of the blue walking into church, their first experience is, I don't understand what this guy is talking about. Okay, and it's like an inside joke. I don't know if you guys, you know, hung out with the same group of mates and you've had this inside joke, and then someone new comes in to hang out with you guys, and someone says the inside joke and everyone laughs except that new person, and they kind of awkwardly just stand there going, I don't even know what he's talking about. So it's kind of like that when people come in new to church. It's kind of like an inside joke. They don't get it. Everybody else seems like they do, but they don't. And they come down to this conclusion that if I don't get it, and they're making no effort for me to get it, then it mustn't really be for me. Then they mustn't really be trying to talk to me. I think that's one of the reasons why people would say church isn't really for me. I think the other big reason that I see, you guys might see different things, but the other reason I see is because I think when church people or Christians, like, they speak out in the media or talk in public and stuff like that, it's usually, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's usually about something negative. It's usually to condemn something or say, oh no, you can't do this, or society shouldn't be doing this. And so people get this impression that church people are just party poopers. So if they had anything to do with church people or Christians, it would just be restrictive on their life. That church people would just tell them what they're supposed to do and what they can't do, And they also get that idea of God. God almost becomes like a party pooper. They don't see God as someone who would input in their lives or even add to their lives. They don't see that maybe God will give their lives meaning, or maybe answer all the different questions that they've had, or make sense of the world around them. They don't see God as providing that. They see God as someone who'll be restrictive. And I think my mate Jerm kind of felt that way. But I don't think the church is like that. In fact, I thought that way until I came into contact with what real church should be, and it actually changed my life. And I want to kind of share with you guys some things about what makes me so excited about Drive and what makes me so excited for church. And those things are what really church really is, and they come from the Bible. Now, the first thing that it actually tells us in the Bible about church is that it is a movement. It's a massive movement. So, contrary to what people have thought in the past, people could get this idea that church is like an old building on the corner, and everybody drives past it without, giving it a second thought. Contrary to that, church is actually a massive movement. And when you think of the word movement, think of what it is. It's like a bunch of people that all believe the same thing, that are going together in the same direction in life, and as they go, they make big changes, and as they go, people kind of like draw to them, and they grab more and more people, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, that's a lot more exciting than what people have thought of church in the past. And when the word movement comes to my head, I think of this movement that we've actually experienced here in Sydney. I don't know if you guys remember, but a few months ago, we had that whole Joseph Kony thing, and it was like a big deal. And this journalist, he went to Africa, and he saw what this horrible war criminal in Africa was doing. His name was Joseph Kony, and he came back and he decided to raise awareness until the government did something about it. And so almost overnight, he got thousands and thousands of friends on Facebook. And people all over capital cities around the world started sticking up, pictures of Joseph Kony in their cities so they can raise awareness of him. And that lasted a few months. And that was exciting, right? Well, the church outdoes that a million zillion times. Because as opposed to lasting a few months, the church has actually lasted for thousands of years. And the church isn't just one guy who's raising awareness or anything like that. It isn't just a bunch of people from different capital cities. The church is actually worldwide. It is amazing where in the world that you would go. Could be like the most remote place, and you would still find people that belong to this movement, which is amazing. That's what the church is. It's actually a massive movement, not a small building, considering what people have thought of it in the past. But there's a few other things I really want to talk to you guys about what church really is. It's really amazing. One of them is the fact that the church has actually been entrusted with God's word, or in other words, what God has to say. And I'll show you guys why that's really, really amazing. I want to read you guys something from the Bible. This is actually written by a prophet. His name is called Isaiah, and he was kind of writing down the things that God was telling him as he was going. So this is really God talking. And this is God talking about his own words, what he has to say. This is what it says. It is the same with my word. I send it out, and it always produces fruit. It will accomplish all I want it to, and it will prosper everywhere I send it. So what God is saying is that my words and what I have to say will always do what it's meant to do. It will always accomplish everything I've set out for it to accomplish, right? So in other words, God can't be ignored. Like, in other words, if he has something to say, he's going to get it across. And if the church has actually been entrusted with what God has to say, then also, in turn, the church can't really be ignored. Yeah, in the past, people have sort of marginalised church, and Oscar, you were talking about that before, but people have sort of put it to the side because, it's those annoying people. Every time they speak up, they're telling us what to do, what we can and can't do, and they're always party poopers and stuff like that. But God says, no, what he has to say is actually really relevant, and it's not going to be ignored. And it's not just because I'm not going to be ignored and, you have to listen to me. That's not what God's like. He actually, look what he says. he says it always produces fruit. In other words, what God has to say is actually good for us. It's like relevant for us. Like, I don't know if you guys knew this, and I'm sure a whole bunch of you guys do already, but the Bible has stuff to say about everything, all the things that matter most to us. Even my mate Germ, if he ever got into the Bible, right, because, you know, I didn't want to when I met church people, so I understand that he doesn't, but if he ever did, he would find that there's stuff in there about all the things that matter most to him, like family and relationships and all those different things. God has something to say about all those different things. And what God says is that his words actually produce fruit. They actually better our lives. They can input in our lives in a way that nothing else can. But you know what? There's something else that's even more exciting than that, okay? This is another part of the Bible. And this is in 1 Corinthians, and so this guy Paul is actually writing to a church, which is like one of the groups that make up this massive movement. And this is what he says. He says, all of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. So what he was saying was that those people that belong to that church is actually part of Jesus Christ's body, or they're actually like Jesus' extension. I'll tell you guys what I'm talking about. When Jesus was alive, and he died, and he came back to life, and then he went to heaven. When he was gone, he made his followers almost like an extension of him. So the way that they had to be him here on earth. And if you've ever checked out Jesus' life and what he was like, people flocked to him. And it was the bad people. It was the people that were looked down on by everybody else. It was the people that lacked meaning in their life, or the people that wanted to make sense of everything around them. They were the people that flocked to Jesus, to want to hear what he says. At one point, he couldn't even stand on land. He had to go out on a boat in the middle of a lake just so that he can make room for that many people to hear him. So if the church were meant to be him, then really, the church should be for everybody. Really, people should be flocking to the church because that's where they find true things. Things that they can make meaning of their lives. And so that's why I'm really excited about the church. I'm really excited about Drive because of what we could be, what we could become. And I'm sure you guys are excited about the things that you're doing wherever you are as well. But that's what church is. We're actually an extension of Jesus here on earth. It's amazing. So as opposed to what people have thought in the past, church is not a small building and outdated ideas, but it's a big movement and real relevance. A big movement because that's what God intended it to be, and real relevance because what God has to say actually matters, and we were supposed to be like Jesus in the sense that everybody would come and flock to us and find out what God really says about their lives and who they are, and get some real input into their lives. But you know what? There are always going to be some people that will say stuff and call themselves Christians, and those people sometimes are not necessarily part of this movement. Those people sometimes are saying things that God doesn't really want them to say, so that'll always be there. But the people that are actually really part of this movement, for thousands and thousands of years, they have changed the world around them. Take, for example, this guy called John Newton. Okay, maybe some of you guys have watched this movie, his movie Amazing Grace. He wrote that song, Amazing Grace, and this movie was made about him. The thing is with John Newton was that he was a slave trader. So he used to go and get people from Africa to be slaves, leave their homes and something that they were familiar with, and come to a foreign place and be treated like animals. He was actually part of this business. This is what he did every day. Until one day he came into contact with this movement, and he came to find what God had to say. And what God had to say was that he created all people the same. So he took that on, right? He became part of this movement, and he was a catalyst to stop the slave trade. In fact, the slave trade stopped because of people like him that belonged to that movement and in that period of time. So in that period of time, what God had to say was relevant, and when they took that on, it made changes in the life around them. So church isn't a small building and outdated ideas, but a big movement and real relevance. Take Martin Luther King, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. You guys would have known of him as well. You know, he had that impressive speech, I Had a Dream, you know, and he actually worked really hard to make sure that there was equal rights between African American people and Anglo American people. He was actually a Christian leader. He was part of the Christian movement at that time. And you know where his starting point was? His starting point was him realizing that God wanted people to treat each other like they would be treated. That's something else that God says in the Bible that's really clear. When he took that on, that was his starting point. It changed the world around him. The reason why we have human rights today, and the reason why we can live comfortably in Australia and other places like that, is because of God's standards, because of God's word. People didn't just take that on from nowhere. That outdated ideas, but a big movement and real relevance. And it's not just about other places in the world and stuff like that. Even just take our country and our city, like Sydney, all right? Our country is one of the best nations in terms of welfare and social welfare and stuff like that. And you know, many of the organisations, especially in Sydney, were started by Christians. People that were part of this movement. St. Vincent de Paul's and the Salvos and Anglicare and the Uniting Church, and there's heaps of them. They're all over the place. And the reason why they started was because they know God actually says that He wants us to look after even the people that have hit rock bottom. Even the people that matter nothing to the rest of society. He wants us to look after them too. Even the people that maybe are homeless or don't have any money, don't have anywhere to go. And so when they take that as their starting point, they have changed the world around them, because the church isn't a small movement and outdated ideas. Taking what God says, it's actually a big movement, big church, and real relevance. But you know what, like I said before, it's not just about society as a whole, but it's even for us as individuals. Like, there's this guy called James Dobson, and he's a world-renowned psychologist. He helps people in terms of family and parenting and things like that. He helps people deal with loss and grief. And he bases all of his work on the Bible. He is world-renowned. Now, the reason why he is world-renowned, the reason why he does, you know, have his name go around and stuff like that, is because his starting point is the Bible. And it actually has stuff to say about all those things that matter most to us. You know, maybe we don't really care about, you know, everything else going on around us. But in the end, our families mean most to us. Relationships mean so much to us. And God has stuff to say about everything in terms of that. And this guy, James Dobson, is actually so famous because he's part of this movement and he's plugged into what God has to say. So the movement isn't it's a small building and outdated ideas, but a big church and real relevance. And every one of us can be actual part of this movement in a meaningful way. And maybe you have been part of this movement in the past, you know, but you haven't really given it that much thought. Maybe some of you guys are not part of this movement yet, or you don't understand the whole God thing or the Jesus thing. Maybe now, like, you know, you're thinking about this and you realize this is actually what's going on. Maybe that gives you a bit of a motivation to kind of find out what Jesus did and why, you know, the Bible's such a big deal. But for some of us as well that have been part of this movement and kind of like just did it, we should be like meaningful parts of this movement. And we can be meaningful parts of it by investing ourselves in things that make God really clear, that make, you know, Jesus' story really accessible. We should support people that actually speak really clearly, plainly, tell things as they are. You know, we can invest in things in ventures that also help kind of portray Christians and church people in the positive as well. Like, not just focusing on the negative things in our society, but also kind of highlighting the positive things that our society has, you know, and showing Christians in the right light. We can invest in things like that. We can be part of that. And that's why, because of that, we've actually started Drive, because we kind of want to just get rid of all the clutter that church does. You know, like, people get weirded out with an old building or some weird sort of ritual thing that we might do up the front. So we just want to get rid of all of that. And we just want to talk about God plainly. And we think people will come in and get it finally. You know, and so that's what we want to be part of. And I'm sure that we're all kind of being part of that in one way or another, but it's kind of like clicking in this year and going, I want to be a meaningful part of it this year. I want to be part of it in a real positive and meaningful way. But I just want to finish off, and I want to say to you guys that I was listening to this like song the other day, and he said something about how it's more comfortable for us to remain voiceless in our society. It was a rap song, so he said it like really weird, but didn't say it the way I said it, but it's so true though, you know, it is actually more comfortable to be voiceless in our society. But you know what? If you are part of this movement, you can't stay voiceless, because God actually has a lot to say. God has a lot to say. And the thing is, you know what? I think we've won a lot of battles in the past, in history, which is amazing. Like, if you look back, you guys, like, there's so much to be proud of in terms of this movement, the church. But there are so many battles here and now that we need to win. Like, for example, I think the biggest thing for me in my mind is trying to get people to stop thinking that God's kind of ditched them. right? Because I think there's these people in society, there's this kind of pockets in society where they feel like God's kind of ditched them and he just doesn't really care about them because everybody else kind of looks down on them. And I think that's a battle that we need to win, to show people that actually God, he wants to forgive people and bring them in relationship with him, that he actually loves them. There's this song also on the radio where right at the end of it, the girl that's singing keeps on saying, love is patient, love is kind, love is patient, love is kind. And I'm thinking, man, I think sometimes people that aren't even part of this movement actually do it better than us. Because, those two statements are actually from the Bible. And sometimes it's Christians that actually don't do the positive thing and don't share the message in a very clear way. And so that's why I think we have battles to win today. And so just keep in mind that the church isn't a small building and outdated ideas, but a big church movement, a big church and real relevance. And with that, we kind of want to start off the year. And we're hoping that wherever you guys are, whatever church you go to as well, we'll all be together kind of in the same path. It doesn't matter if we're a drive church or we're another church or whatever, but as long as we're kind of in the same path, wanting people to get it for what it really is and not clutter it all up. But thanks so much for listening to me, you guys. I want to kind of pray now and then I'll give it over to Bassi.